although we are very near to the setting of the sun, that is still the sun on my face, and therefore it's still Shabbat Shalom. And welcome to the third installment of Parasha Vayishlach. And this is, of course, going to be the rabbi's nugget portion of our Midrash. And so I'm looking forward to seeing if I can't really try to give you guys something, of some power behind this really crazy parasha. I mean, the whole thing is just controversial all the way around. And of course, doctrines have been formed from the discussions about it. Churches have been split over the reality of it, right? It's just been this madness. And so as the sun is setting, we're going to go ahead and jump into kind of an evening session of the discussion of the parasha. Really, technically, the Shabbat will be over, but we're going to go ahead and go hard in the paint and see what we can come up with here. Okay, so first of all, one of the things that I want to say is that there are people in this congregation who have some insights. And although Deborah Zohara is going to be off camera, she's going to make some comments. She's going to speak up loud enough for you guys to hear, even though that she's actually just in the other recliner and not feeling well. But she wants to add to this really quick, and then we're going to jump into some crazy stuff. Go ahead.
So I was saying that I know we have often talked about how the Word of God, the Torah, is multifaceted. And if in no other portion we see that completely clear in this portion, with Jacob wrestling. And we've often, theorized and summarized, who or what he was wrestling with. But in this portion is specifically, we can see how Jacob could have easily been wrestling with Esau. He had wrestled with Esau all of his life. He had wrestled with him in the womb. He had wrestled with him and caught him by the foot, at birth. All of his life, he had been wrestling with Esau. So we can see how he could easily be wrestling here with Esau, especially if nowhere else in his mind. If it wasn't a physical wrestling, he was certainly emotionally, mentally wrestling. But that wouldn't have ended up in a physical hip displacement.
Or would it?
I don't know. Could have possibly been.
You being a massage therapist know that sometimes psychosomatic symptoms occur.
Thing, especially when you're talking about emotional pain being stuck somewhere in the body.
Yeah.
Emotional energies playing out in a real physical manner somewhere in the body.
Sure.
We can also see that that Jacob could have definitely been wrestling with himself over all of these issues, but he could have also easily been wrestling with God at the same time. He's at the pinnacle of, are you really going to return me and guard me safely into my return home to my father's house? Which was the promise that God gave him when he left, and here he is, scared to death. And I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but he says, I'm afraid of Esau, when he's talking to the angels, when he's talking to the messengers that he's returned to him. And here I am putting messengers in air quotes, but you can't see that. But we can see all these facets and probably even more if we really looked for them. And so in this portion alone, we can, if nowhere else, we see multi options, and it was probably all this and above it was probably God. It was probably Yeshua that he was wrestling with. It was probably himself. It was probably Esau, all in one quote unquote man, you know. And I want to also bring up another point. I really think Jacob, being the one who accepted God's covenant and said, if you do this, I will do this. As a man who accepted God's covenant, he would have understood when, and I'm using this portal back and forth, that Yeshua said, Baruch Haba Yashem Yahweh.
Blessed he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And I think even if it wasn't Esau that he was wrestling with at that moment, that he understood those words and was able to recognize even Yeshua in Esau. Because we're supposed to be able to recognize him everywhere, in everyone. That's what I have to say.
Okay. So it's interesting that so one of the things that Deborah has presented here is the concept that it's all of those interpretations. And it's interesting because Christian theology demands that you only interpret a certain way, and if you interpret it differently, that's the congregation you go with, right? And so the premise is that if we say, well, Esau was destined to go to hell and he was chosen by God to be one of the damned, which is pure Calvinism, 5-point Calvinism, then we accept that this is why this happened the way it happened. If Esau had chosen not to enter into covenant with Yahweh, as given the opportunity, which we determined, when Isaac blessed Jacob, when he comes back, Isaac blesses Esau, but he changes the way he blesses him, but he still gives him the dew of heaven. And what he said to Esau was, I already gave him the dew of heaven. There's nothing left for you. And then he turns around and says, you could still have this if you do this correctly. Submit to your brother, because later on you can throw off his yoke when you are strong and when you prosper. Esau didn't do that. Esau decided to go with, I already have, Nimrod's coat. I already know how to do divination. I already know magic and all these other things. I don't need that. I'll kill him. I will kill him. When my father is dead and I am done with my mourning period, I'm going to cut that dude's throat. So we can see where choice plays a role. We can see where, again, free will causes an adjustment to the plan. You see, the mistake that Christians and theologians and people and students of the Bible have made is try to stick God in a box and force him to be a certain way. And I'm going to tell you, my entire life is wrought with script flips, where he just flat out said, okay, you thought it was this, it's actually this. And guess what? Until you believe that, I'm not telling you anything else. And it has been a constant struggle to go, all right, I surrender that too, where I have finally concluded nothing is immune to the chopping block. And what I found is that a lot of times he just uses concealments. Yahweh uses curtains. And if you want to live within that level and look at that curtain and say, yep, that's how it is, he won't ever pull it back on you. But if you start to seek something deeper, oh man, you would not believe how many times I've had to change my doctrine. I've had to change my thinking. I've had to change my attitude. I spent a year living with a Muslim imam And the circumstances by which I was in that situation, I was under his protection. In other words, there was no violence could be done to me by his word. And you know what? Him and I even got into a fist fight over doctrine. But what's interesting is I learned that there's an entire culture and sentiment behind Islam, that they have got prayer beat when it comes to us. They've got dedication to their tenets beat when it comes to us. They don't compromise for fear of death from their fellow Muslims, right? That's powerful, because what it taught me was that there's Torah in Quran. And I read Quran and I was like, oh, that says that. What? Why don't, how come do people think this, right? Here's my point. My point is that over and over and over again, we see our Father flipping the script on people. And so do we say, oh, this was definitely angels and Jacob sent angels to Esau and Esau responded with 400 men? Well, that's what the sages say. The sages say that Jacob actually exercised his dominion authority as a master Kabbalist to defeat something a lot deeper, which we're about to get into. So this is the part that's important. Number one, I do not intend to use your 66-book compendium to prove what I'm about to prove. I will use some of it, and it is important that we stick as much as we can to it, but I am not ignorant to the devices of mankind to use that which is valued to control. And I propose to you that the Protestant canon is that. In fact, even the Catholic canon is that. Okay, so now here is the first thing that we need to get into. And that is, after the flood, mankind is pretty much divided into three groups. The Canaanites, or the sons of Ham, the nations or the Gentiles, sons of Japheth, and of course the Shemites, the sons of Shem. Now, this is not to be confused with Semites, which was a very inappropriate actual definition of Jews, okay? But it's important that we understand that these three groups seem to be congregated centrally in the Fertile Crescent, or near there. Let's say extending all the way over into Iraq, into Persia, into Turkey, into Egypt, into Arabia, into Yemen, in all directions, but still, and this is important, pretty close together, pretty close-knit group of people. The Tower of Babel was built, and instead of them using mortar, which was already a knowledgeable cement for making homes with stone, they make adobe bricks that scientifically are known to be higher in thermal retention, but also are scientifically known to be waterproof. And then instead of using mortar. For cement, they use tar, the same stuff that was used to waterproof the ark. And then they build a tower whose height reaches the heavens when the water was 15 cubits atop the highest mountain. Meaning what? That they would actually have a tower taller than what the flood had demonstrated it could do last time. Because there were definitely already people scientifically knowledgeable and understanding of how many cubits of water or per square inch of water or cubic inches of water fell on the earth. Engineers designed a system so that people could actually outlive another flood. But what were they trying to outlive? God is the one who preserved humanity. What were they trying to outlive? And what were they doing? They said, we will make a name for ourselves. And that is the axis of a chiastic structure that begins with the building of a city and then the building of a city and then and then Yahweh in some form coming down and looking at the city. Now, there's some other important aspects, right? But that's the gist of it, is that they were clearly stating, we don't care about your rainbow. Bring another flood. Because we got that this time. We ain't scared of you. Now, I am one to very much say that a very inaccurate doctrine is the fearful sinner in the hands of the wrathful God. A very inappropriate doctrine. And that's because the first emanation of Yahweh is chesed. And his first enunciation of his name with Moses when he's in the cleft of the rock is Raham, or Rahum, compassion. And I have taught you in times past that compassion is the only thing that can actually move energy. That when the dunamis flowed out of Yeshua, it only flowed because of his compassion upon that woman and none of the rest of the crowd. To the extent that he wanted to make sure that not only would her faith be identified publicly, but that she would never be forgotten. That her story would be told to the ends of the earth. As opposed to the fact that we still don't know the name of the Pharaoh that was in Moses' time. Because why? Because Yahweh said, I will remove your name from the earth. Yeah. Okay. So when we are working with this sentiment, we need to understand there is a dynamic of man versus God. But here's the crazy part about it is it's an inappropriate doctrine from the beginning. They are going to what? They're going to build a tower whose heights reach the heavens, which if you get into the Midrash Rabbah and you get into the other books, I think there's even a little mention of something about it in Quran, that it was not the heavens as in the sky that it was reaching, but the supernatural realm, and it was a portal they were building. They were going to try to go through the portal and make war with God. Because Nimrod had gotten in his thick skull an idea that he could make war with God. He had figured out how to make war with God by hunting his humans, hunting the Shemites. And he had figured out how to make war with God by trying to create this portal. And when Abraham confronts him and says, you can't worship these things, he goes through a big old argument with Abraham and eventually tries to kill Abraham and can't do it. And so he exiles him. He forces him out of the land. Why? Because Abraham would be an absolute threat to his system of making war with God. But here's the problem. There are two. One is that man does not have the capability to cross that threshold unless through death. And I can tell you that the death you're thinking of is not the death I'm speaking of. But then also man has the inability to understand that he's not in the hands of a wrathful God. God never wanted to make war with Nimrod. But Nimrod wanted to make war with God. And if I remember right, the legend is that there was someone left over from Cain. And that Nimrod was part of that group. Don't want to get too much into that because it does say that all flesh died. Anything that had the Ruach and the Neshama within it died. But I'm going to propose to you that we need to be cautious to just use the Bible to hear these stories. I'm going to propose to you that it's very possible that if we would open our mind to the other stories that are out there, we might get some insight. Now, I'm not saying that we just go drop into the Epic of Gilgamesh and all of a sudden the flood isn't worldwide, but is only local. And I'm going to propose to you that it's very possible that that might have been the perception of the writer of Gilgamesh. That their known world was Mesopotamia. And maybe the flood seemed local to them. We could get into all kinds of evidences about the flood to try to explain how that's true. But instead, I'm just going to go ahead and say, you know what? If you can't handle that, you don't need to be here. If you can't handle that, we may need to look at some other things to try to understand this more. I don't really mind if you leave. I don't. Because I know that there are people who are going to hear their shepherd's voice and are going to change their behavior based upon what I'm about to tell you guys. It's simply this. When Yahweh dialed back the part of himself that was preventing creation from existing because of the level of energy, vibration, and frequency that it was occurring at, he had to slow things down a little bit so that they could exist. He knew it was not an accident, and don't let any Kabbalist tell you that he didn't know. He knew an alternate version of himself was being created, a contrary version. Now, this is not an opponent, but instead is the result of the void that was created. He knew that there would be a darkness if there needed to be a reduction in light. Because remember, all darkness is the absence of light. Go into a closet, close the door, cover up the bottom of the door, turn off the light. What happens? All light disappears. Turn on the light. What happens? Light and maybe some shadows, right? Like the coats in the closet probably cast a shadow on the back wall. But when you turn off the light, it's totally dark. Because what? Because all darkness is an absence of light. Well, when we accept that light is energy, or as Tesla said, light is actually sound operating on the ether. Ether being scalar energy, which is non-Hertzian. It has nothing to do with vibration and seems to have something to do with consciousness. Then we can accept that an absence of light is an absence of vibration. And the lower we go in vibration, the more solid or corrupted from the original light formula something becomes. Higgs boson, right? That's the principle, the Higgs field, right? Now, here's where this gets important. And I want to say that the more that we get into the argument here of whether or not this is true, we miss the point as to what it really is saying. There is a backside to light, a definable darkness. Okay? And that definable darkness is, and this is important, that definable darkness is a result of the contraction of light, pulling back of light, so that there would be an empty vessel prepared to receive. Because remember, the whole entire point behind the intensification doing this, the intensification of all power in the universe doing this, is that it, whatever you want to define it as, desired to bestow all 100% of its benevolence upon an other. That other had to be able to exist in a place where nothing could exist. The Ein Sof, or the infinite light of nothing, meant there was no matter. Everything was traveling at faster than the speed of light. He needed to slow things down, so he did. He created a place in which creation could exist and everything could exist. And what's intriguing is that he did this with an understanding that there was going to be a choice. I've always taught you that the feminine principle of God, the feminine principle of Yahweh Elohim, is a negation particle. I've always taught you that she needed to have absolute 100% free will without bias towards abundance, protection, or information. She could not accept him except for him, which means she had to become totally corrupt in her understanding, or devoid of the light in her understanding, before she could truly accept the light. All of the wealth of the light had to be removed from her, which is why we have humans. Humans are that final level of darkness. And we're the only light in this realm. Where there is 99% darkness and 1% light, we are that 1% light. But what you don't realize is there's still 99% light present, but not something we can perceive or understand, because there's a concealment. Remember, from the beginning, it was a concealment. That dialing back was just not revealing the whole entire truth about existence. And so she receives the light by free will, but that means that she has to be corruptible. She has to be able to accept darkness or accept light with absolute autonomy. Or he's forcing it on her. And he could not bear that. Or he's manipulating her. And he could not bear that. Why? Because he's 100% benevolent. So here it comes. There is a path of darkness, concealed light. That path of darkness is where demonic forces come from. That path of darkness is where malevolence comes from. That path of darkness is where the ego comes from. That path of darkness is where the workers of darkness and their arts come from. Meaning what? Esau had studied darkness. He had studied the dark side of the science and theology of God and had become a master of it. I believe it is Rabbi Ashlag who says he became a master of the backside of the tree of life. Esau had figured out how to manipulate the universe using the absence of light, which explains why when the sun was rising, he had to leave, and why all the Edomites lived in caves, and why they were known as the masters of idolatry. Go read about Edom in Scripture and figure out why Edom still comes up in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Why are they coming up? We don't bring up Moab anymore. We don't bring up the Hittites anymore, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, the mosquito bites. We don't bring any of them up. What do we bring up? Edom, right? Come on. There's a reason for this. How did Esau kill Nimrod? A master sorcerer. One making war with the creator of the universe is killed by some Shemite. That's how. And he steals his magic. He steals his sorcery. He steals the books, the information, all of it. And Esau becomes a master of it. Meaning what? He overrode. But the sages say that when it says he was a hunter, that was one of the side effects of the cloak. To become a hunter of men. And what have I taught you in the cycle of Israel? We go from infestation to oppression to possession. Infestation being what? A little bit of idolatry. Come and worship gods with us, right? To what? You don't have any rights anymore. We're going to take that away. Oh, by the way, you're not allowed to make any more weapons. So we're going to remove all the blacksmiths. You want your tool sharpened? Come to us, Philistines, right? And then what? Ownership. God sold them for a cheap price. He sold them for nothing. That's possession. That's ownership. Under what? Under another God. Oh, but Deuteronomy 32 says they're not gods, but are demons. Welcome, Esau, to the chess game. So now something interesting happens. Whereas Esau becomes a master of dark magic, of black magic, which requires the shedding of blood, the consumption of blood, the torturing of animals, violence as a worship of something dark. Jacob becomes a master of the light, understanding what his grandfather and his father could not. How to activate covenant by calling God on the carpet. You said you're going to do this. Let's get it done. Right? So now we get into some really interesting information, because now we can see that the Elohim that Esau was, that Jacob saw in the middle of the night, was not the Elohim of Yahweh, but was a dark Elohim, an unstable vessel, an unstable man in all of his ways, being blown about by the winds of doctrine. That's what James says. One who asks with doubt, not really doubt, but asks for the wrong reason. Esau mastered darkness. And there's more. because now we have this ultimate showdown coming. And Jacob knows it. Jacob has figured it out. Jacob sends angels to Esau and says, I know your trip. You come meet me by the brook. We'll figure it out. And so they meet man to man, do their thing. And he says to Esau, what is your name? What is your name? And he says, why do you ask my name? You know who I am, right? And then it says, and he blessed him there. The wording in the Hebrew is ambiguous. It doesn't say who blessed him. And unlike the Greek, where there is a genitive, nominative, accusative, and dative conjugation on the verb, so you know who the subject is of the verb, Hebrew does not offer that privilege. And so you don't know who blessed who when it says, and he blessed him. But we know that whatever happened, whoever he was wrestling, named him Israel, but he walked away being called Jacob. That Jacob limped when he walked away, not Israel. So then what? Esau's darkness saw into the future and saw what was going to happen. Esau's darkness was able to determine that he would be called Israel. And so it was not a blessing. Why was Jacob seeking a blessing from Esau? Because if Esau could bless anything, he still had light in him. But the proof is in the name of the parasha, and your head is about to get wrecked. Vayishlach. There's a couple very important elements present in all of this. The first one, and this is huge, it has the conjunctive vav, which means what? There's a time switcher. And every time there's a time switcher, something mystical is happening. So it doesn't say, and he sinned. It says, and he will send. But because of the way Hebrew grammar works, it actually means that it has already been completed. That little vav switches what would be to that which has been. And it's a powerful truth in Torah. But now watch this. The conjunctive vav goes from I will shalach, right? I'm sorry, he will shalach, to he did shalach. What is shalach? This is important. The act of shalach is go and sin no more. It is a releasing of the debt of sin. Jacob was a master of the light. And if he was a master of the light, what is he doing messing around with sending gifts to Esau and splitting up the families into these different, everybody's like, oh, he's terrified. He's afraid. It's not what it says. It says that he was, I believe the word is avad. Let me look real quick because I think it's a very, very, very important verse in chapter 32. I will share my screen so you can see this. And look at that. The sun is still up. It is still Shabbat. I love it. Okay. Maybe the sun will stand still while we study our verses. Okay, here we go. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Let's take a look in the Hebrew. No, 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 no. Bam, right there. H905. Bod. Okay. Let's go look at it. Let's jump into this. From the root word badad, to withdraw, be separate, be isolated, right? Okay. Let's go see its first usage. Boom. Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. Then Yahweh Elohim said, it is not good for man to be alone. It is not good for Jacob to be alone. Why? Because of what's about to happen. But anyways, he was alone. It doesn't say he was afraid. It says he was alone, like Adam, right? Without his Ezer. Without his Ezer Connecto. And what happens? Here comes somebody who he calls the face of God, and then turns around and calls his brother the face of God, which I presume to say then, very, very presumptuously, it was Esau. But here's the crazy part about it. He says, bless me. And why is he saying that? He's trying to see if Esau has the capability of speaking light. Because why? What's he trying to do here? He's trying to rescue his brother. And the proof is in the name of the parasha, because what is a shlicha? A shlicha is a sending forth, a releasing. Number one, a shlicha is what is given to a rabbi when he has completed his learnings. It's a sending forth. Number two, a shlicha is, I forgive you. Remember, a master of the light now sees his brother in absolute darkness, knows it, sends angels, warriors of the light who are beyond this realm of physical being. And what? Tries to release his brother from the darkness. What was all the separating? What was all of the sending of the gift and all that? Maybe if I give him back his birthright, he will step back into the light. It's my fault. An act of ego, which he definitely has to wrestle with before he meets up with Esau. But when he meets up with Esau, Esau says, come back to my land. And what does he know about the land of Edom? That it is a land of idolaters. No, I will not return to that place. And where does he go? To Sukkot. And I will not tell you the level of power and all of the stuff that's tied in the fact that he went to Sukkot instead of to Edom. But Vayishlach was, and he forgave. Messengers to Esau. I propose to you that this is the ultimate tikkun, to take a Hitler and try to bring him back into the light. To take a Jeffrey Dahmer and try to bring him back into the light. Because if in what capacity you are capable of being evil, you are capable of being good. You have that power across the spectrum. In what capacity you have the darkness, you actually have the light. Because that's just the level at which your vessel is able to receive. So it doesn't matter what you put in there. You still have the capacity. I believe that this parasha is about the attempt to tikkun what Nimrod did by destroying Nimrod's power in one simple disintegration in trying to get Esau to utter a blessing. 72 facets of wisdom of Torah, 72 different interpretations, 4 different levels of interpretation. 72 times 4, you do the math. That's how many different interpretations of Torah. Add in Yeshua's words as another level of interpretation, and we've got thousands upon thousands of interpretations of Torah, possible meanings to how a verse should be read. This is mine for this day, is that this is the ultimate tikkun, that Jacob knew because he had put on the darkness. He had put on the robe, the magician's robe, so that his father could not see the light, because Isaac's eyes were not dim. They were discouraged. Remember that? And so, in principle, as Isaac observes Jacob in the darkness and blesses him, so that Isaac is not held to contempt for blessing Esau, because remember, Abraham did not actually physically lay his hands on his son and bless him so that he could not pass the blessing to Esau. But then Isaac has to ask Yahweh to bless Jacob. And specifically doesn't say Jacob or Esau, does he? He says, Lord, bless the boy. Isaac knew, but he understood that Jacob had to not be enticed by the robe. And my understanding is that Isaac is the one who later tells Jacob, don't go to Haran yet. Go see Shem and learn from him, because he saw that Jacob was able to take off the robe. Can we find that in the 66-book compendium? Nope, we cannot, but we can find it everywhere else. We can find that entire story in its compilation, to where Esau is a master of black magic, and Jacob tries, as a warrior of the light, to recover his brother, so that his brother will become a Baal Teshuvah and will fall under the honor and authority of Torah, which is Yeshua. Share your thoughts with me. What does this mean for our lives? Is there an Esau who we could restore? Is there possibly proof in this story that you can't restore Esau? Is it possible that, the truth be told, that it is possible to fall into a state in which you are not restorable in this lifetime? Those are questions. They need answers. There's a doctrine called ultimate reconciliation. I believe it is the doctrine of the Unitarians, but it might be within another group. I know that they were congregation. I know they're Congregationalists. They don't have a king and they don't have an eldership. But I can't remember if it's the Universalists or not. Anyways, point being is there's a doctrine that eventually everyone will come to the light. Truth be told, as if I'm a being born of the light and not born of darkness, as it seems Augustine would prefer us to be, and his beloved Marcion asserted, then I would say that I will find my way back to the light. Raise a child up in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will walk therein. What happens in between? And what does it look like? Does it look like righteousness? Does it look like holiness? Does it look like good, ethical, just, fair? Or do they come out of the fire smelling like smoke? And what does it mean that Esau left before daybreak? What does it mean that Esau invited Jacob back to the mountain of Edom, Mount Seir? Go do your research on Mount Seir. It will scare you. What does it mean that he wanted him to come join him in his city? People say, oh, is he going to bring him back there and kill him? No. Esau wasn't trying to kill Jacob anymore. He was trying to convert him to darkness. Because if both children of Isaac became children of darkness and sorcery, Yahweh's covenant would fail, meaning what? Esau was still making war with Yahweh. Esau carried the torch. After he killed Nimrod, he was enticed by the same magic, the same sorcery, the same darkness that Nimrod was. Share your thoughts if you have any. Shavua Tov, the sun is down. Have anything? Nope. I wrecked her head. Okay, so anybody want to bring anything up or make any statements, or are we just going to leave this where it's at and go contemplate it for a while? Okay. Well, I can't say Shabbat Shalom because the sun is down, but I will say Shavua Tov, which means have a good week, which is what? Counting down to the Shabbat again. Shalom, shalom.